For the next hour, one of my favorite guests, Tom Horn, who's an ordained minister, but now certainly he's spending his time researching what's going on and publishing books. And he publishes not only his own books, but other people's books. He even publishes our book and helps us to get it distributed across America. Hi, Tom. How are we doing?
Oh, great, Dr. Monteith. Good to be back with you. Well, by the way, last time I talked to you, was at the Pikes Peak Conference in Colorado. That's been months ago.
I know it is. And that was a wonderful, wonderful conference, and I certainly appreciated the opportunity to be there with you and with the others. Well, why don't you sort of bring us up to date with what you see taking place and then how that ties into the books that you have, and you've written several recent books about this, and then you've written another book with Terry Cook, which I think is excellent as well. So you co-authored that one about Beast Tech. But you go right ahead. Why don't you tell our listeners about your books and really how they are so applicable to what's going on today?
Well, it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure how I wound up where I am. We've turned out to be the number one publisher of prophecy books among 230 publishing houses in our distributor for something like 9 years in a row now. So somehow I just wound up here, and this is what I do, and I'm having the time of my life. Of course, the thing that's got me busier than ever for the last few years, and I did this on your show too, you recall, a couple of years ago, coming on your show talking about the prophecy of the popes, and I made a bold prediction in which I said that I believed that Benedict XVI was going to step down. He was going to resign, that he'd be the first pope to do that in 600 or so years, but I believed that he would, and I even believed that he would probably do that in April of 2013, which we now know that he did officially when he returned from a trip in March of 2013 internally in the Curia. He turned in his resignation to the leaders there and told them they needed to start getting ready for the conclave that would elect his successor, and that was brought out in a New York Times article after he officially made his resignation known to the world. Well, of course, because I had made that prediction, and in fact I was on a radio show about 10 days before Benedict made his resignation official, and I said that the resignation of Pope Benedict is imminent. It's going to happen any day now. And when it did, brother, I'll tell you, I had phone calls coming in from all over the world, including from Rome, media in Rome, wanting to know who my insider at the Vatican was. And I laughed and said if I told them it was the Holy Spirit, they'd really be confused. But making that prediction, the book, you sell that book, you make it available to your listeners for an offering. Petrus Romanus, the final pope, is here. And then, of course, the sequel to that book, Exo Vaticana, which took us even further down, the whole into mystery, and we can talk about all of that tonight because there's some very interesting things that are going on now in Rome that much of the public may not be aware of, and things that are going on top of a mountain in Arizona, too, that people may not be aware of.
Well, we'll want to talk about that, but people have to understand that the new pope, and many people think he may be the last pope, but basically he is pushing certainly a world religion. He wants to unite the religions. He wants to unite the nations. What is he doing this for? Well, because there seems to be a force behind him. He's really sort of embracing the idea that almost like a Marxist concept. Why is the Pope doing that? He's supposed to be the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church. But there are powerful spiritual forces, and actually the fact that Tom had written about this before it took place, predicted that the Pope, certainly the Benedict, would resign, and they would have a new Pope. Well, basically, I think this foretells we're moving into very important spiritual times, ladies and gentlemen. Very important spiritual times. And I guess this afternoon is Tom Horn, who's written a couple of books certainly on what happened. One is called Petrus Romanus, and the other is called Exo Vaticana. And basically it goes into the fact and writing long before Pope Benedict announced he was going to resign. Tom Horn predicted Pope Benedict would resign and he would be replaced. Now this doesn't really happen. It hadn't happened in 600 years, but it did happen just exactly as as Tom had predicted that it would happen, because the Holy Spirit had led him to believe this would happen. Why? Because the new Pope is openly pushing for a one-world government and a one-world religion, going right along with what we talk about all the time, and that is certainly this movement, which I believe is energized by dark and sinister spiritual forces, and certainly things that foretell very, very difficult times coming in the Middle East, and probably there's going to be a war over there. It's not a matter of if, but when. And what are we doing? Well, right now we're doing everything we can to finance the Iranians. Of course, people are not telling you that, but we've released certainly the restrictions on them, the embargoes, so now they're going to be able to get all sorts of money and trade their oil so that they can suddenly build their nuclear weapons in preparation for what I believe is the coming war. And everybody said, oh, no. Oh, we're giving them money so they won't build nuclear weapons. And if you believe that, you're incredibly naive. Reality is usually scoffed at. Illusion is usually king. Tom, you pick up the story.
Well, absolutely right. There are some strange things that are going on in Rome today, and we did predict the resignation of Benedict, and we did predict a lot of what's happening right now. Part of that is not because we, for any moment, claim to be prophets, but rather we're studious. We did a tremendous amount of research, literally tens of thousands of pages of research. We even uncovered ancient documents that were written decades ago by other Catholic mystics who predicted that the Gloria Olivae, Pope Benedict, that he would step down, and they said they saw that happening in the year 2012. So there was a lot of stuff kind of pointing that way, but now later in this conversation, I want to also bring up our old friend Malachi Martin, because he too made some predictions, and they are very germane to what is going on in Rome now. But so I don't skip ahead too quickly, this book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope, is here. If people are listening and wondering, what are we talking about? In that book, we detailed this ancient 900-year-old prophecy called the Prophecy of the Popes. It's alleged to have been given by an Irish...
Hold that thought. We'll be right back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Tom is just talking about certainly the prophecies, 900-year-old prophecies, talking about what may well be this time. And basically they were anticipating that certainly Pope Benedict would resign and that he would be replaced by another pope, probably the last pope, and that these would be important and very significant spiritual times. Tom, you pick up the story.
Yeah, the prophecy of the popes is ascribed to an Irish bishop about 900 years ago, Malachi O'Morgare, or who's more commonly known now as St. Malachy, having to do with his prophecy called the Last Pope. This was a prophecy, by the way, it was hidden for hundreds of years inside those highly guarded vaults of the Vatican library, and there's a great deal of research in the book that people can get directly from you, Petrus Romanus, that describes why that was happening and the importance that this document held, the mystical importance that it held for the cardinal electors who were electing popes only if they could be seen or understood in some way or another as fulfilling the lines in that prophecy. But in any case, it's just a prophecy. It's a list of 112 Latin verses predicting each of the Roman Catholic popes, from Pope Celestine to the final pope. Now, why would we care about this 900-year-old prophecy? Because the final one on the list, Pope number 112, is described as during his reign, Rome is destroyed and the world enters into the Great Tribulation period. Well, according to this 900-year-old prophecy, the new pope, Pope Francis, is this final pontiff that is going to lead the world into the time of great deception, of great destruction. And the world, including Catholics right now, have their eyes on Francis, watching what he will do. Now, the thing that became even more interesting for myself and my co-author, Chris Putnam, was how while we were out there doing all these shows, and we predicted that Benedict would step down, and he did, while we were doing those shows, people were calling in like crazy, Dr. Monteith, and they were asking us, yes, but what do you make of the Vatican ET connection, as they started calling it? And by that, what is meant is people wanted to know why is the Vatican out there with their talking heads right now saying so much about astrobiology, aliens, and how the Catholic Church would be able to accommodate a dynamic ET reality. They wanted to know why. Why is Funes and all these other talking heads saying that the alien is my brother and we're closer now than not to the discovery of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence and all the things they were saying about them. So Chris and I didn't want to just, come across as two evangelicals who might take some of what these astronomers for the church were saying out of context. So we decided that we were going to thoroughly investigate that claim. And among, of course, our research was the ultimate goal of going to Mount Graham in Arizona, where the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope and their Jesuit astronomers are, which we did, and we can talk about that in a moment. But I should tell you, Dr. Monteith, we found evidence that this new Pope, this final one on the list of the prophecies of the Pope, we uncovered how that he has kind of a secret and historic relationship with the members of the VORG, that is the Vatican Observatory Research Group, the astronomers for the Church. And as a matter of fact, as a young adult, Bergoglio, who's now known as Pope Francis, he earned a master's degree in chemistry from the University of Buenos Aires, and he had ambitions prior to entering the Jesuit order of going into scientific studies, including astrobiology, the search for life on other planets. Secondly, when the current leader of the VORG, Jose Gabriel Funes, also from Argentina, when he entered the Jesuit order, guess what? One of his examiners was Bergoglio, and we established that there is a long-term relationship between George Bergoglio and Gabriel Funes and other members of the Vatican astronomers. And then thirdly, in a recent interview with the Catholic press, Funes said that this first ever Jesuit Pope is very soon going to turn his attention to, guess what? Astrobiology, exactly as we predicted would happen in the final chapter of the book Exo Vaticana, which people can get from you. And you might notice that in the news recently, even the Catholic press is talking about how this Pope is shaking up things in Rome. Heads are rolling, they say, over there. But they also say that very soon he is going to touch upon church doctrine, and they've implied that he is going to somehow sanction some new forms of church doctrine. Well, man, my eyes are on this, because this would play exactly along the line of what we predicted in Exo Vaticana, with some new commentary that's going to come forth concerning the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, we weren't the first to connect the Jesuits, astrobiology, and the final Pope. I have to give credit to our good old friend Malachi Martin. And if people listening to this show don't know who he was, let's just say he was an insider of insiders at the Vatican. He was a Jesuit, like Francis is. He worked for 3 popes. He could speak 17 languages, some of which are ancient and extinct. He worked in the Holy See transcribing the Dead Sea Scrolls for the Vatican. He was a personal friend of Augustine B., one of the most famous Jesuits in history. Had access to some of the deepest secrets, including the final mysteries of Fatima, which he implied were certainly not released in 2000 when the Vatican said they were. But bottom line is, there was a day when he asked for leave of his priestly duties, and he moved to New York City, where he became a multi-time, best-selling New York Times writer of fiction and nonfiction, actually what he called faction, fiction based on fact. But if part of his works were based on truth, well, let's just say there are some really scary things going on in the Vatican, including some dedications to the Archangel Lucifer and things like that he wrote about. But even long before word hit the news about pedophilism, you recall Malachi, he was out there saying it was happening. He was being mocked by other priests, and he also connected it to Satanism. But much of what he said has consistently, line upon line, been turning out to be true now for the last decade. Now, why should we care? Because there were 2 things that Malachi Martin said that seem to be playing out in Rome right now. One, he wrote a book called The Jesuits, The Society of Jesus and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church. Is that book available from you?
No, we don't carry it anymore. We do have a 4-CD set of my interviews with Malachi, but we don't have the book, The Jesuits.
Okay, well, I'm sure in your interviews you dealt with the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, because even though Malachi hoped that the things in that book would not happen, exactly what he predicted has happened and is happening. He said that there was a secret war between the Jesuits and the other priests, the purpose of which was to take control over the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican in particular. And note that just this week there was a New York Times published article in which they said that heads are set to roll in Rome. They said priests there are afraid that they're quietly speaking of 7 secret Jesuit spies, they said, that are working for Pope Francis. And evidently the public face we're seeing on this Pope is not what these priests think are happening, because they're talking about a power takeover, if you will, of Rome and the Vatican for reasons that are not yet clear to them. But what did Malachi Martin say would happen? He said this secret war is going on. He loathed the day that a Jesuit would ever be able to take control of the Vatican. Lo and behold, now we have the first Jesuit in history who's just been elected the Pope, and Malachi Martin must be rolling over in his grave, because people need to know the Vatican isn't like any other Christian denomination. It's unlike anything. It's got 90 ambassadors at any time parked at the Vatican. It's got relationships, political and otherwise, with most of the most powerful nations in the world. And according to Malachi, the Jesuits wanted to seize that power, control over the Vatican. And for what purpose? Get his book and read it, or listen to the audio tapes with Dr. Monteith, my friend here tonight, because he said they wanted to use it as a machine that would do what? Give assistance to the rise of a new world order. And here's what he said: global socialism and Marxism. I mean, exactly what is happening right now coming out of Rome is what Malachi Martin was very afraid was going to happen. And if you read his book, of course, what he ultimately says is they want to work in tandem with the coming of the Antichrist for the implementation of the objectives of the Antichrist. That is, to implement a global Antichrist, socialist, Marxist system. So the hair almost hardly ceases to stand up on the back of my neck right now, Dr. Monteith.
And I think it's so vitally important for people to understand that we're fighting a spiritual battle. People look at see what's going on today and look at it from a political or historical or financial point of view, but this is a spiritual battle. And basically these powerful forces are here. This is the first Jesuit a pope in 500 or 600 years. Why at this time? Because we're entering into, I think, very, very dangerous times for both Catholics and Protestants, and I think the things that are unfolding in Rome are going to have a tremendous impact. And basically, of course, I personally talked off air many times to Malachi Martin, and one of his books, The Windswept House, he talked about a satanic sacrifice that was feigned in the basement of the Vatican, but was actually timed a human sacrifice to correspond with a real human sacrifice carried off elsewhere. And I said to him, Malachi, is this imaginary? Is this something you made up? And he said, no, it's not made up. It's real. I can't write it as if it's real. I put it in fiction form, but this is exactly what's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not joking at all. I mean, fortunately, Tom has evaluated this extensively, and at least we have some experience having talked to Malachi and other priests. We're entering into very difficult times, and certainly both the Catholics and Protestants are in this together, but there are dark and sinister spiritual forces at the top of both the Protestant and the Catholic Church. However, with the new Pope there, he is pushing Marxism and socialism, wanting to unite the nations of the world, the religions of the world, the religions of the world. Tom, you go right ahead and pick the story up.
Well, I want to talk to you about astrobiology, but some of the stuff you were saying just now about your conversations both on the air and off the air with Father Malachi Martin I'm going to have to get that set of CDs from you. I didn't know you had those.
We will have them. We'll be glad to send them to you free of charge. I'll have my secretary do that. In fact, if my secretary is listening to the program right now, why, please go ahead and get those off to Tom without charge. Go right ahead.
Well, thank you so much for that, because Malachi, I'm not a Catholic, but I had great respect for Malachi, and I have great respect for a lot of Catholic theologians. And in fact, when we visited Mount Graham, I have to tell you that the way the Jesuits treated us on the top of that mountain was exemplary in terms of the way Christians ought to treat other Christians. We were very, very impressed with the sense of Christ among the people that were there. But so I don't get off track, some of the things you were saying about Malachi Martin, 10 years before something pulled his feet out from under him while he was preparing for an exorcism, and he died. He fell, actually, and then later he died. At that time, you probably know this, Malachi was working on what he promised was going to be his most explosive book yet. And I still recall the title. The title was going to be called Primacy: How the Institutionalized Roman Catholic Church Became a Creature of the New World Order. And Malachi had become increasingly outspoken about not just pedophilism, but what he called pedophilic Satanism at the heart of the Vatican, which he said ran throughout the College of Cardinals all the way down to local parishes. People, he said, that were in league with a secret diabolicus that began following that enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer in the Roman Catholic citadel back in 1963. And this is a ritual that he goes into in his book that he said had two primary objectives. Number one was to enthrone Lucifer as the prince over Rome, but number two was to assure the sorcerous inception and embodiment in flesh of that immaterial spirit that would fill this final pope, Petrus Romanus, in what he called a final conclave. In fact, he wrote another book called The Final Conclave. And many people around the world right now believe the conclave just ended was the final one based on the 900-year-old Catholic prophecy, the prophecy of the popes. But in any case, so I don't get bogged down, people should get his book, get The Keys of This Blood, The Struggle for World Dominion, get the book that you mentioned a moment ago, Windswept House, in which he describes the enthronement of the Archangel Lucifer. But Dr. Monteith, in research for Petrus Romanus and also Exo Vaticana, both of which books people can get directly from you, I would encourage them to do that. That research took us to certain priests who tried to warn of a pope that would arrive in what Malachi Martin called this final conclave. This would be a pope who they feared would be the false prophet of biblical fame, a man under the control of Satan. And some believe that Malachi Martin was killed, murdered, and that his death was covered up for revealing that satanic scheme to use the Catholic Church as a launching pad for a Luciferic Novus Ordo Seclorum. Now, we're never going to know for sure, but 1 year before Malachi died, his really good friend, Father Alfred Coons, was brutally murdered at his St. Michael Church in Dane, Wisconsin.
Hold that thought. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and we're talking with Tom Horn, certainly about the strange death of Malachi Martin, and certainly he supposedly fell downstairs and then subsequently died in the hospital. Was it a coincidence? Well, he was working on certainly another book. He was going into the background of pedophilia at the highest level of the Catholic Church. Ladies and gentlemen, pedophilia is institutionalized in the Catholic Church. I've talked to people, in their 30s and 40s now who tell me, off the air, certainly about how they were molested by Catholic priests. I mean, certainly these things happen, but they happen so frequently, and pedophilia has been suddenly institutionalized at the highest levels of the Catholic Church. In fact, Pope Francis has recently appointed a commission to actually look into this organized pedophilia. We have very real problems. In fact, I have another friend. His name was William H. Kennedy. He was related to the Kennedys, and certainly he was a Catholic who had written certainly extensively about pedophilia in his book Lucifer's Lodge, and done a number of interviews with me. In fact, we talked to him just a few days before he mysteriously died at the age of 59, were writing about spirit, writing about the pedophilia and the Satanism within the Catholic Church. Do they kill people? I have no question that they do. Go right ahead, Tom.
Well, that's the whole thing around Alfred Coons. Malachi Martin, he dies, but a little while before he did, his good friend, Father Alfred Coons, was murdered there at the St. Michael's Catholic Church in Dane, Wisconsin, and Coons had been investigating the same Satanism among priests that Martin had warned about, and he had told Malachi Martin in the weeks before his murder that he feared for his life. He had some things he wanted to share with Malachi, and that never happened because Coons was found dead with his throat slit. And as soon as he was found, Martin went on radio and he claimed in various media that he had inside information that these Vatican Luciferians had murdered Coons because Coons was getting ready to blow the lid off their conspiracy. Now, I can tell you, as a result of our investigation with a private investigator and our inquiry into the police department and the investigation and everything else, there really is evidence to support what Malachi Martin was saying. Once again, this guy that has taken, since his death, people have been somewhat critical of him. Some of the priests have been because they wouldn't want people to believe some of the stuff that he said was true, but more and more it's turning out that exactly what he said was going to happen. I mean, I predicted Benedict's resignation, right? So I get one score. Malachi Martin didn't just make one prediction. He said exactly what was going to happen. He said the Jesuits would take over in the form of a pope in Rome, and as soon as he did, they would begin promoting a socialistic and Marxist kind of world view. And Malachi Martin essentially wrote the headlines for the year 2013 and 2014, and we have really got to hope that some of the other stuff that he wrote about doesn't come to pass. But when he was talking about Coons being murdered by Luciferians, there was a satanic animal sacrifice described by Malachi Martin in his book Windswept House. And that was part of that enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer in the Vatican. That's important to read because then go and study what happened to Coons. It seems like somebody was mirroring what Malachi Martin had written. It's eerily comparable to actually what was discovered in Dane County during the first hours of the murder investigation, including that a calf was sacrificed on a farm near St. Michael's Church, exactly 24 hours before Coons was last seen alive. And then according to police reports, the calf's throat was slit, just like Father Coons was. Its genitals were cut off. And there are details that I won't discuss. We didn't discuss them in the book, and we're not going to discuss them on this show because they're of a horrific nature. But let me just say that deep within occultism, there are reasons for removing the genitals of a sacrifice that have to do with blasphemy of the Old Testament description of animals being accounted unworthy as offerings to the Lord if their testicles are bruised or crushed or torn or cut. You can read about that in Leviticus, the 22nd chapter. And then there's also an occult idea that decapitated persons cannot partake in the resurrection. So there was a lot of evidence here that dark rituals were used to try to somehow magically curse Father Coons.
Well, I think most people find it. We don't like to think about this sort of thing. We like to think of good things and nice things, entertaining things, but we live in a fallen world. And although we live in certainly a material world, there's an immaterial world. We live in a visible world, there's an invisible world. We live in a tangible world, there's an intangible world. We live in this objective world, but there's a spiritual world, and we're involved in a spiritual battle for the souls of men and the survival of Christian civilization. And our job is to get the information out, and hopefully both Catholic and Protestant will be brought closer to our personal relationship with our Lord Jesus Christ. We'll be back in a moment. Tom, you go right ahead.
Well, anyway, we were talking about some of the issues with Father Coons and the investigation. People can read part of that investigation in the books Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope Is Here, and Exo Vaticana, which both are available through you as I understand it, and they'll see how during our investigative research for that book, we actually made formal requests of the Dane County Sheriff's Office for the pertinent case files pertaining to the ongoing investigation of the Father Coons homicide. And we were told at first that the files that we specifically had asked for were going to be given to us. And then on December 5th, 2011, and I published this letter in the book, we received a letter from the office of Lieutenant Mark Twombly, signed by Sheriff Mahoney, that the district attorney would need to approve the release of the files. In other words, it was going to take a court order, and therefore the request that we had made was going to be denied. And since we understood that, it's an active, ongoing case, these are sensitive records, they don't need to be made public at this time because the investigation is ongoing, and that was all understandable. So we filed a second request for less delicate documents, and we were able to obtain a packet of those files, which helped us a little bit in our investigation, but none of them provided the solid clues that we were looking for to the larger question of conspiracy related to the murder of Father Coons. Specifically, was Malachi Martin correct? Was evidence discovered at the crime scene that Coons' murder was somehow connected to his conservative position on Vatican II, actually, and more importantly, that he had information on certain pedophile priests and Satanists that had earned him fierce enemies within the church, reaching all the way up to the Catholic hierarchy in Rome, involved in ceremonies or behavior related to that enthronement of the Archangel Lucifer that Malachi Martin had written so much about. Now, I said earlier, and I know we're already halfway through this hour, so I want to get to this, that was only one thing that Malachi Martin had written about, the Jesuits, and how he was aware of this secret war that was going on and their quest to become the controllers of the Vatican. And how
hold that thought, we'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Tom is saying that Father Malachi Martin, who we both knew, and certainly I had interviewed him many times, and Tom had as well, but Father Malachi Martin was well aware of the fact that there was an organized effort on the part of the Jesuits to take over control of the Catholic Church and then spread their philosophy and their deviation and their Luciferian influence throughout the hierarchy there. Certainly in Rome, and today, for the first time in 500 or 600 years, we have a Vatican certainly as the Pope, and he, of course, is working very hard to bring about a one-world government, a one-world religion, and to begin to unite the nations of the world. He's also pushing certainly these socialist and Marxist concepts, which, in my estimation, are truly demonic in their background. But you go right ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and the other thing that we said at the beginning of this show was that this new pope, the final pope, according to the prophecy of the popes, line number 112, he's the last one that will lead the church into the Great Tribulation and the destruction of Rome and so on. But this pope also, as a Jesuit, has a relationship with the VORG. We started this show out talking about that. That's the Vatican Observatory Research Group, and my co-author Chris Putnam has a little bit of fun in the book Expo Vaticana, which people can get from you, comparing them to the Borg, of sci-fi fame. But
would you like to tell us a little bit about this? This place where they have the telescopes. It is basically it's a center where they're actually studying the stars. They're really looking for these extraterrestrial beings, these extraterrestrial vehicles that are coming in, because they're pushing this whole philosophy that UFOs certainly are coming from other universes, and really they're not. In my estimation, they're demonic manifestations. But what they're doing, of course, is focusing attention external, so people will not understand the true nature of the spiritual battle taking place today. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, in order not to take what the Jesuits were saying out of context, not to be accused of taking it out of context, Chris Putnam and I decided that in order to accomplish a true investigation, that we had to go to the horse's mouth, in this case the Catholic horse's mouth, on the top of Mount Graham in Arizona. And this was one of the other things that Malachi Martin had talked about, those Jesuits on the top of that mountain. Now, how many listeners to this show are aware that about an hour away from Tucson, Arizona, there is an advanced telescope.
This is a massive observatory, isn't it? It is
an observatory.
Right.
There's actually
Right.
3 high-tech telescopes. One of them is the biggest one in the world. And they literally forced themselves onto the top of that mountain. Part of this is owned by the Vatican. Don't forget that when Art Bell in 1997 was interviewing Malachi Martin on Coast to Coast, and he said, "Father Martin, why did the Vatican force themselves on the top of that mountain in Arizona? Why are they up there? Why are they so heavily invested in the study of deep space?" And Malachi Martin's answer ignited a firestorm in that he said, they're up there because at the highest levels of Vatican governance and geopolitics, they know what is approaching the Earth and that it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. Now, Malachi put about a decade time frame on that, and Dr. Monteith, almost to the date, a decade later, 2009, what happens but that the Vatican abruptly calls for an astrobiology study week. They had the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, the scientists for the Vatican, bring together 30 of the most powerful astronomers in the world and geologists, theoretical physicists, but they also brought in theologians. And that whole week they discussed what will the impact be on faith, on religion, given the disclosure or the discovery of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence in the universe. Now, I don't think it's coincidental that only 90 days later, the Royal Society, now we're talking about the oldest scientific body in the world, convened a meeting in the United Kingdom, January 2010, and imagine this, this scientific body is 350 years old. They'd never done this before, but 90 days after the Vatican came together to discuss the detection of extraterrestrial life and the consequences for society, they come together and ask exactly the same question, sending the media into a frenzy. Do they know something that the rest of the world does not know?
Well, what are your thoughts on it, Tom? Do you think that there really is something coming in? Is there something coming in from another universe? Or is this a great distraction?
Well, it might be a great distraction, but no, I think there's actually something, and let's think of it in terms of a great deception at the doorstep, a time when the world's most politically powerful church seems to be playing into the hands of, I agree with you, evil supernaturalism. It's obvious now that the Vatican is preparing for, maybe even monitoring from Mount Graham, the approach of something that Malachi Martin said would come about this same period of time. When we went to Mount Graham, we had the sense that they are using those powerful telescopes to watch something that is approaching the Earth. Following their conference on the grounds there in Rome, and then 90 days later, the Royal Academy meeting there in UK, the media wanted to know what was going on. They wanted to talk to some of these people. They wanted to know why the Vatican was asking, what is the impact going to be on faith? And so the Vatican sends out Gabriel Jose Funes, the head of the VORG, the Vatican Observatory Research Group, and he immediately starts lobbing these little softballs out there, saying, well, it's just in case. The Vatican's made mistakes in the past. We don't want any issues with trampling on scientific thought, and etc. But then he starts saying some deeper things, like he's saying the extraterrestrial is our brother, and furthermore, it's not only incompatible, it's not incompatible with Christianity to believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, but if you do not believe, he's on record saying this, in extraterrestrial intelligence, that's the heresy, because it would put limits on God's creative ability. And that began, Dr. Monteith, what has been a process that we document in the book Exo Vaticana, where we literally turn up hundreds of documents written by the highest level academics for Rome and for their universities. In this, it's kind of a developing scheme, if you will. It's a theological argument. And keep in mind that some of these are Opus Dei level theologians. They're writing theology for the Pope's University in Rome that ultimately can be sanctioned, become doctrine for the church. And when you see some of the stuff they're writing, it puts cold chills. But let me not get ahead of myself. Funes then says that extraterrestrial intelligence is not going to challenge the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. The minute he said that, here's the question that popped into my mind. How could you possibly know that? How could you possibly know that the discovery or disclosure of life on other planets will not challenge the authority of the Roman Catholic Church unless you've made some kind of Mephistophelian bargain, some Faustian deal with some power that you happen to think is an extraterrestrial intelligence? How in the world could you know that it's not going to challenge the authority of the Roman Catholic Church? Now, that's a really mysterious statement, but maybe he knew something about what another priest at the same time was saying, a priest by the name of Monsignor Caroldo Balducci. Now, Balducci was the official spokesperson for the Vatican on the subject of UFOs and aliens. He was an exorcist, he was a theologian, he was a personal friend of the Pope, and you mentioned these guys that died mysteriously. He died too a few years ago under mysterious circumstances. But just before Balducci died, he was out there on Italian television. He partook in a documentary that was made here in the United States, and you can go watch these on YouTube. And what is he saying? He's saying this. He's saying the aliens exist. They're here now, and as an exorcist for the church, he said, I'm telling you that they're not angels, they're not demons, these are advanced people. That's how he refers to them. But furthermore, he says they're morally superior to us. And Dr. Monteith, that's an argument that is weaving through a great deal of these high thinkers for the church right now, in which they're saying that these ETs are going to manifest themselves, and when they do, they're morally superior to us. They're closer to God than we are, and they're going to give us a better revelation about the gospel than what we have now. And in fact, some of them are saying we may have to throw out everything that we think we have ever known about the gospel.
In other words, basically what they want to do is destroy Christianity.
When I came down off that mountain, after some of the stuff that I heard on the top of that mountain, and we not only visited the Vatican Advanced Telescope, we also went to the radio telescope that's there, and then we also went to the Large Binocular Telescope, which is the largest telescope of its kind in the world, and that's where the Lucifer device is kept, which is co-owned by the Vatican, the Germans, and all the rest of them that are up there. I wanted to know, based on some of what they told us on the mountain, but also what they've been writing lately. And I'm not talking about the stuff that the media has heard. I'm talking about the kind of stuff where the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome, the Pope's University, is being written in terms of term papers that are used then to become canon, that are used to become doctrine. And there's some very spooky stuff that they're writing, and I can even give you some quotes out of that. But I wanted to know, so when I got off that mountain, I contacted Brother Guy Consolmagno. Guy Consolmagno is one of the top astronomers for the church. He's really well known. If you type in his name, you'll see him in the media everywhere. He's the Pope's keeper of the Vatican's collection of meteorites and all that other stuff. He keeps his summer residence there in Gandolfo, Italy, the Pope's summer residence, where they have another telescope. But he splits his time between there and Mount Graham in Arizona, and he wasn't there when we went. So when I came down off of the mountain, and oh, by the way, you don't just decide that you're going to drive up to the Mount Graham Observatory. You can't get in there. It's all fenced off. They've got police. They'll arrest you. You can't get into the place. I had to negotiate that through the Arizona State University. And that all by itself is an incredible story. In fact, I've had a lot of young people tell me that Exo Vaticana, their favorite part of that book, they said, is that story of us going up onto that mountain. They said it's like an Indiana Jones movie. They just loved it. Well, anyway, we went up there, we came down, I contacted Brother Cosmonalgo through the observatory and asked him if he'd be willing to answer some of my questions. A lot of what he gave us is in the book, and it has been astonishing, people. But all of the quotes that we make by him, just so people know, are not the quotes that he gave us personally. They're the quotes that are in his own book that he wrote, Intelligent Life in the Universe, Catholic Belief in the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligent Life, which was published by the Vatican-owned Catholic Truth Society, and then was almost immediately pulled from the market. And you cannot find that book anywhere. They put it out, they pulled it from the market, and there was even an intentional effort to go out and retrieve every copy that made it into the public forum so that the book wouldn't be out there. And that was mysterious to me. I wanted to know why. And early on in my interviews with him, I interviewed him from Rome 5 times, I asked him if I could get a copy of that book, and he sent me the original PDF, the one that went to the printer. And I now make that available to people who will simply email me and ask me for it, because all the quotes we make in Exo Vaticana are from that book. Now, what does he say in the book? When I ask him, about those Catholic Church scholars that are talking about these aliens being morally superior to us, and I said, where could you find an example of that in the Bible? And guess what? He points me to Genesis chapter 6. And he talks about the Nephilim and those fallen watchers. But he doesn't call them fallen. He refers to them as those who are more intelligent than we are, coming here from another world. And he compares them to aliens. I was astonished by that. And he also does that in his book.
Well, so because the Nephilim, of course, the byproduct of the mating of the demons and women, human beings. Go ahead.
It's absolutely demonic, but he uses that as an example of those who might come to the earth again in the future who would be more intelligent than we are and capable of providing a greater revelation of God. So I found that to be just absolutely astonishing, right? So then I pressed him on that question, and he said, Tom, have you not read John 10:16, another sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. And he breaks that down. He does this in his book, Intelligent Life in the Universe, which again, if people need proof, I'll email it to them. He uses that to say, they shall hear my voice. Okay, they're closer to God than we are. They're going to come here, give us a better revelation, and we're all going to be one fold and one shepherd. So he sees what we would call the second coming is basically an alien armada with their leader coming to say, I've been here once before. Now, here is where it really gets astonishing. When I pushed him further, he says, perhaps, and this is a direct quote from his book, but he sent it to me in the email. He said, Tom, perhaps it is not so far-fetched to see the second person of the Trinity, the Word, who was present in the beginning, John 1:1. Now he's talking about Jesus, coming to lay down his life and to take it up again, John 10:18, not only as the Son of Man, but also as a child of these other races, end quote. That's in his book, and he emailed it to me, and I was just incredulous. I emailed him back, and I said, really? Brother Consul Magno, I said, do you and other Vatican scholars actually believe that Jesus might have been the star child of an alien race? I mean, do you Jesuits secretly hold that the virgin birth was in reality an abduction scenario in which Mary was impregnated by E.T. and gave birth to the hybrid Jesus? And when I put it that way, he wouldn't answer my question, but that's exactly what he says in his own book, and I know that that's why they pulled his book, Intelligent Life in the Universe, because it conveys information that they think maybe the general public isn't ready for yet, but it unveils an astonishing belief system among some of these Jesuits. And I got to tell you, I've had so many dear Catholic people that have emailed me and said, well, Tom, the Jesuits are heretics. We don't believe anything that those guys say. But my response back to them is, yeah, but dear brother and sister, they're the ones who are writing your doctrine. And that's the reason why it's important. And during our investigation, and these are in the book Exo Vaticana, we compiled an extraordinary number of documents written by Jesuits, Opus Dei level church theologians, that are now arguing in favor of three things. Number one, that advanced extraterrestrial intelligence exists and it's morally superior to us. Number two, they're coming here to evangelize us. And number three, we are going to have to change our theology to accommodate that belief system.
And of course, the new Pope is a Jesuit, the first one in 500 or 600 years. And basically, of course, for our Catholic brothers and sisters, it's going to be a difficult time for them. We have problems in the Protestant Church. The important thing is we have to actually base our belief upon the Word of Scripture, not upon the words of men, because there's been an organized, in my opinion, an organized effort to infiltrate the upper echelons of both the Catholic and the Protestant Church. We're in real trouble today. Isn't it wonderful to know there is a Lord that loves us, but we need to be true to Him? We'll be back in a moment to wrap up this fascinating program with our good friend, Tom Horn. Well, Tom, that was a really amazing thought, and basically, why don't you just go ahead? We've got 3 minutes for you to wrap up the program. We could go on for hours, but unfortunately, time limitations prevent us from doing that. You've got about 2.5 minutes to wrap up the program.
All right, well, Dr. Monteith, first of all, thanks for having me back on your show again. It's always great to have the opportunity to be on with you. You and I have been doing radio for decades now, and it's always a pleasure. Look, the Bible has some intriguing things to add to what we've been talking about. First of all, it says that the Antichrist is going to appear with lying signs and wonders. Are those going to be UFOs, aliens? It also says his coming is going to be marked by fearful sights and great signs from heaven. Is that what Malachi Martin said? That the Vatican was on the top of Mount Graham watching? The Bible also says the Antichrist, the false prophet, are going to be aligned with the powers of the air and able to call down fire from heaven. And then most intriguing is Daniel, who says the Antichrist will actually champion worship of a strange alien God. In Daniel 11:38 through 39, he says, in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and precious stones. Thus shall he do in the most stronghold with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge with increase in glory. And that Daniel's prophecy there, I've had scholars, not Tom Horn, scholars, translate that for me, and they say that the God of forces, the God of fortresses, can literally be translated there as an alien God. So we're living in strange times, Dr. Monteith. Thanks for having me on your program again. We'll have to do it again sometime. I would really want to encourage people, if they want to get all of the information, we barely scratched the surface tonight. They need to get the book Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope Is Here, and the second book, Exo Vaticana. These are large books. They're 6x9 covers, and they're something like 600 pages long each, and they have just literally hundreds of endnotes in them that will give people the information that they need in order to follow up on this incredible interview.
It's an incredible story. Thank you so very much for being with us. We'll look forward to having you again on our other networks in the near future. God bless. And thanks so very much.
God bless.
Bye-bye. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and I hope you enjoyed the program. I think this is one of the most important programs you've heard in a long time. We do carry the book, Petrus Romanus, and then we carry the second book, Exo Vaticana. They're both available by calling 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. And then, of course, we do have the 4 CD set, The Wisdom of Malachi Martin, 4 interviews with Malachi Martin, where he, of course, tells about how the latest Pope was, Pope John Paul II was chosen, basically. There is another Pope that they actually did find, and basically he was on his way up to certainly to be accepted and accept the papacy, and somebody handed him a slip of paper that said, if you accept the papacy, you and your entire family will be killed. And you'll hear Malachi Martin telling that story in the 4 CD set, as long as so much other information. Malachi's certainly analysis of his books, both factual and certainly his novels, and of course his novels based upon real life events, and then his factual books. That's the 4 CD set, The Wisdom of Malachi Martin. Martin. We have another 4-CD set on spiritualism, 2 hours with William Kennedy, who died mysteriously after writing certainly about the pedophilia and Satanism at the highest level of the Catholic Church, and he himself a Catholic, concerned about what's going on. So if you'd like to get the Petrus Romanus book, an excellent book, and incidentally, I write the foreword to that, and I look back, I really did not understand the significance of the book. It's an amazing book. We recommend it highly. And then, of course, Exo Vaticana, the 4-CD set, The Wisdom of Malachi Martin, the 4-CD set on spiritualism. Just get one of them and start out. I think the book is excellent. Our telephone number is 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. If you haven't read my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, let me suggest it. Why? Because, of course, it goes into the same underlying theme. We were involved in a spiritual battle being played out on a political, ideological, and cultural battlefield, but it is a spiritual battle for the souls of men and the survival of Christian civilization, and this is certainly not being brought out well in our churches, or we're being brought out certainly in television and things of that sort. In fact, basically, there's so much in television today that is aimed at convincing you that there are UFOs out there coming in from other universes. We are going to be carrying a wonderful 4 or 5 CDs. I guess there are about 4 CDs in each package on UFOs. They're put together by a good friend of Pastor Billy Crone. Incidentally, Billy called just today and scheduled some more programs with us. But we're going to be carrying his 4 CD sets on UFOs, Part 1 and Part 2, each with 4 or 5 DVDs in it, and vitally important information that you need to understand about these entities. They're not imaginary. They are real, but the question is, what are they? And then, of course, if you haven't seen Pastor Crote's DVDs on the Final Countdown, and we carry 1 through 8. Each one has 4 or 5 DVDs in it. You need to understand the prophetic times in which we're living, and you need, of course, to utilize these to help others understand that though we live in a material world, there's a mystical world out there. We live in a visible world, there's an invisible world. And basically, the Final Countdown, an excellent series, each one with 4 or 5 DVDs in it, that the prophetic countdown, or the Final Countdown, they're all available by calling 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. This is the time I have to remind you that my ministry, Radio Liberty, is still primarily listener-supported, and we need your help to maintain the networks we have. We have 4 or 5 networks. We do 5 hours of talk radio a day on 3 different networks. And then, of course, we ask you to pray for America, to pray for revival, but please pray for Radio Liberty, our provision and our protection.